What is up, everyone? This is Mike Andrews. This is my very first video on my YouTube channel, Mike Drop Daily Fantasy Sports, and I will be breaking down this college football main slate that we have coming up on this Saturday, November 20th, 2021, week 12 of the college football season. I already have an article for this slate up on my Substack. It is over 8,000 words. I wrote a boatload about this slate, so check it out, read all the angles, and that's really what I'm trying to do. Give you all of the angles for these games, the game scripts, what they might mean for certain players, what the matchups will look like, and which players look to benefit from projected game scripts. Maybe a different scenario plays out. Who would benefit in that case? And that's where you might be able to find some leverage. So that's what I'm going to go through in this video as I describe the players I'm interested in this week. If I don't talk about them in this video, maybe I have a little bit of interest. Maybe I'm not interested at all, so feel free to leave a comment, ask me about certain players, hit me up on Twitter at mandrews93DFS, ask me some questions, see what I'm thinking about certain matchups, bets, plays, anything you want, I'm there. So hit me up, let's talk. Anyway, to start at quarterback, the first guy that I have some interest in on this slate is Brennan Armstrong from Virginia. Virginia, right now, is a 13.5 point dog to Pitt, but this is a very high total game, 66.5, coming in second on the slate in terms of games here. So Armstrong, I think this line anticipates that Armstrong will be out again this week. He has some rib injury, had trouble throwing the ball in warm-ups last week against Notre Dame, didn't play. Jay Woolfolk came in at minimum price and didn't look great, but Notre Dame's defense better than Pitt's in my opinion. Also, Woolfolk will have another week to start, sort of with the mindset maybe that he will be the starter. I don't know what's going on in the Cavaliers camp, but Armstrong, good quarterbacks. He's a load of volume, will rush a lot, particularly around the goal line. Woolfolk also ran a lot last week, but that Notre Dame defense, like I said, is good. Pitt's rushing defense, very good. Pitt's passing defense, not so good. So I think Armstrong has a bunch of upside here through the air, especially if Pitt takes advantage of this shaky Virginia defense, like I think they will. So I think whichever quarterback gets the start here is playing catch-up and will likely be throwing a lot. So I have a little bit of interest. My main interest would be Armstrong if he starts, but man, he is expensive, and I can just see it. His rib injury, the main problem for him last week seemed to be throwing in warm-ups. He threw, kind of shook his head, and left. So it makes me wary that he might have trouble throwing the deep ball, and that would really hurt, I think, his upside in this spot. And also, if he takes a shot to those ribs, if he plays, the Pitt defenders are going to be eyeing up that juicy rib cage and just knocking it. So I don't love Armstrong in this spot. I think, maybe there's potential he doesn't even finish the game if he starts. So I'm just not going there myself. But I mostly just say it because if Woolfolk plays, he has minimum price for a team that is currently projected for 26.5 points, which is not bad. Not that bad. And they'll be trailing. So that too. Bryce Young for Alabama is the next quarterback I have interest in here. Young does not run the ball, and he likely throws, a bunch of times here. 300 plus yards, couple touchdowns involved, and his main receivers are pretty obvious. So he makes for a good single or double stack option with his receivers. And remember, this is a guy that you will need to be stacking with one or two receivers simply because he does not run the ball. Any points that Bryce Young gets, if he has a ceiling game, 40-plus DraftKings points, which I don't find particularly likely in this spot, but certainly possible. Any of those points that he gets will be through the air and will be going to his receivers as well. Those main two receivers being Jameson Williams and John Mechie III. C.J. Stroud for Ohio State here has the best passing matchup in the entire country this week. He plays Michigan State, who is giving up a massive amount of yards through the air. If you want the exact stats, they are in my article, And you can see also the sort of games from last week's article that Michigan State has given up to opposing passing games. I laid out those stats to make the case for Talia Tagovailoa as a value play last week. I don't have to lay out those stats to tell you that C.J. Stroud is a great play this week. If Talia, Charles Okonkwo, and Raheem Jarrett posted a combined 80 points against them, you best believe that Stroud, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave will combine to hit that number. Last week, I put this stat in my article too. The number of points that those 4 players combined to score was something crazy. It was 130 DraftKings points. So if you're playing all of those guys, you would be playing 3 of those 4 guys in most lineups, I would imagine. So any of those stacks I like. I went through it. Wilson has been the either 1 or 2 first or second performing player in these stacks 5 times this year. Olave has been there 4 times, and Jackson Smith and Jigba has been there 3 times, with 2 of those coming in the past 2 weeks. So I think Smith and Jigba sees a lot of ownership here, makes him an appealing fade, because I think Olave still has a big role here. Garrett Wilson also still has a big role here. So I think people might forget about Olave a little bit in this spot. So I really like any combination of them. I lean toward Wilson as my favorite, and then Smith and Jigba as my second favorite, and Olave as the third favorite. But there's merit to stacking all 3 of these guys, mixing and matching different ways. But I would definitely be playing 2 of them if I'm playing Stroud, because he is like Bryce Young in that he does not run. So he is entirely passing game dependent for his points. And if he gets there through the air, it will be 2 of the receivers benefiting, most likely. Kenny Pickett, also a lot like these guys, a little bit more rushing upside. Maybe a rushing touchdown in there from Kenny Pickett, maybe 40 yards on the ground, but unlikely to see anything crazy out of Pickett on the ground. But Pickett through the air, huge threat, averaging more fantasy points per game than Young or Stroud, which might be surprising to many people given the caliber of those 2 quarterbacks. But Pickett, he is boosted by the fact that he had huge games against Duke, New Hampshire, and Western Michigan. Those are not great teams. Those are not great teams at all. And they actually lost the Western Michigan game, and they were trailing that game. So Pickett was in a shootout there against a bad team. So not surprising that he's posted 40 points against those teams. They all suck. Virginia's defense also sucks, but I think Virginia a little bit more respectable than those teams. Virginia also has a terrible run defense. Maybe Pitt takes advantage of that a little bit. But Pickett, great play in this spot again. His main stacking partners would be Jordan Addison, $7,100. And then the other appealing thing about Pickett is that he opens up another high dollar roster spot, because you're probably stacking him with Addison, and then you're probably also stacking him with either Jared Wayne, who is very cheap, $4,300 or $4,100, or Lucas Krull, who is $3,600, the tight end. So there are cheap options here to stack with Pickett, and I think, Addison, you're looking for 25 to 30 points out of him if you're stacking Pickett and hoping Pickett goes for 35, and then Jared Wayne and Lucas Krull, you're looking for 15 to 20 points out of those guys, and they've been hitting that recently without Taysir Mack in the lineup. So a lot of good value on the Pitt receiving core there. I actually don't mind also playing Wayne or Krull as value plays if you are loading up on some of these higher dollar options. Those guys can get there and, by themselves. They don't need Pickett and Addison, or they can get their solo, and they present the savings that a guy like Jameson Williams doesn't present, right? So you get some savings in your lineup, and you can still play, Ohio State passing game stack, and then still take a piece of the Pitt game for value that is not like Jordan Addison, also a 7K receiver, like the Ohio State options, So you're trying to build your lineup in a way that you get pieces of these offenses without breaking the bank. And Pitt, out of the three offenses I just talked about, Bama, Ohio State, and Pitt. Pitt is the only one that offers those cheap options that look to actually have a lot of appeal on this slate. Desmond Ridder from Cincy, interesting, intriguing play here. He's been seeing a lot more rushing work recently. Had a touchdown on the ground, most carries last week of his whole team without Jerome Ford. If Ford misses this game again, I really like Ridder to basically do it all for them in this spot. But if Ford is back, that could hurt Ridder in taking some touchdowns from him. Ridder just hasn't been the same guy this year. He's not running like crazy like he was last year. And the passing game is low volume. I don't love this spot for Ridder. Like, SMU's run defense has been not bad. They play Cincy every year. They should be pretty prepared for the Cincy offense. The Cincy offense hasn't been super impressive lately. Sure, they beat up on USF last week, but USF is terrible. So Ridder, not great. And then his stacking options, Alec Pierce. This is a guy that was $4,000, $5,000 last year. Now he's $7,600. It makes no sense. He doesn't see the volume you would need for that. He doesn't get the touchdown equity you would need for that price. If I'm stacking with anyone, it's Josh Weil, his tight end at 5,200. But then you're looking for 2 touchdowns out of Weil, basically the only way he hits his ceiling. So that's thin too. I'm just not really getting there on Ridder this week. I think these other 3 aforementioned options are just better and present more stacking partners. Because if you play Ridder, this is something people talk about a lot, like JM to Win talks about from OWS. He was actually one of the inspirations behind my article format and really breaking down the angles of these games. Ridder, if you play him and you play him solo, that leaves a lot more that you need to do in your lineup to fill it out, right? There's a lot more things that you need to get right and a lot more plays you need to work through to fill out the rest of your lineup. Whereas if you play CJ Stroud and 2 of his receivers, that eliminates roster spots that you need to consider. You're locking in a block of points as opposed to one spot where you might get points. So you have to consider these things when you're building and make it easier on yourself. Jordan Travis from FSU, interesting in this spot because Boston College is bad against the run. The problem is they are very good against the pass, and Travis is not really a passer. So what I mean by this is Travis gets there on the ground usually, but his ceiling is unlocked by some additional passing game work. He'll get 2 touchdowns through the air, 2 on the ground, and then you're looking at a ceiling game. If he just gets 2 touchdowns on the ground in this spot, I don't think he's going to kill your lineups that fade him at $7,000. So for me, I'm not getting there too much on Jordan Travis this week. Brock Purdy from Iowa State is interesting in a game that overall is very interesting to me. One of the most interesting games on this slate, one of the biggest games on this slate too. Iowa State and Oklahoma played twice last year. And I don't typically look at every matchup in years past, but I think this is a matchup that's interesting because they played twice and we saw 2 different outcomes. In Ames, Iowa State's home game, they won by 7 points. Breece Hall ran 28 times, over 130 yards, and 2 touchdowns in that game. Brock Purdy didn't really have to do anything. They controlled the game, ran the clock. Breece Hall did his thing. In the Big 12 championship game, it was the opposite. Oklahoma jumped out to a 24-7 halftime lead. Brock Purdy threw 40 times, which would be his second highest total on this entire season. And he posted over 300 yards, and the receivers did well. So I think if you're playing Purdy in this game, you are betting on Oklahoma taking a lead and holding it for a bit in this game, kind of getting out to a 2 to 3 touchdown lead. And then Purdy has to play catch up. They can't run Breece Hall because they can't afford to run the clock. Now, Hall probably still gets work, but there's no way Hall pays off $9,500 if Oklahoma takes a lead in this game. And Oklahoma is the favorite at home. So I do not like Hall that much in this spot. I much prefer Purdy and his stacking options of Hutchinson and Charlie Kolar. I think there's merit to playing Hutchinson with him this week, but Hutchinson not like a multi-touchdown threat for the most part, sort of just like a deep ball threat. And then they tend to turn to guys like Hall or Kolar around the goal line. Kolar has multiple touchdown upside in this spot, as we saw last week. Doesn't have a ton of yardage upside, but I think he's very capable of posting something like he did last year against Oklahoma, like 6 for 80 and a touchdown, which is like 20 DraftKings points. And Hutchinson might, also post around 20 DraftKings points, but when you're considering price, Kolar is the much better play here, in my opinion, because I think there are guys around Hutchinson that can go for 40. And so can Hutchinson, if I'm being perfectly honest. Hutchinson can go for 40, but I don't think I'm not dying to play these two guys together. So I'm probably either just playing Purdy and Hutchinson, or I'm just playing Purdy and Kolar. John Metcher, I'm still on quarterback here, aren't I? Keaton Thompson from Texas has performed really well for them in 3 home games that were complete shootouts. But in the road games, he's really struggled. And WVU profiles more as sort of one of these tougher defenses that Thompson has struggled against compared to the games he's succeeded, which I believe, off the top of my head, were Kansas last week. That was an obvious one. Kansas, Texas Tech, TCU, Oklahoma, and I think TCU. So bad defenses there, though. Bad defenses. And yeah, WVU not bad on defense. And I think WVU also will look to slow the game down. And that kind of takes Thompson out of play for me. Thompson will have to throw the ball a lot if they get down in this game, which mostly just leads me to want to play Xavier Worthy, take some stabs on him. But he would be the main stacking partner, if you believe, in this Texas passing game in this spot. And then followed up by Marcus Washington for Texas, now that Joshua Moore is not with the program. So there's only 2 receivers here, really. But you should be aware that Jordan Whittington might return this week, which could ding Washington. But I think Worthy is pretty solidified as his number 1 role in this offense. Aidan O'Connell from Purdue is pretty cheap this week again. Has not a great matchup with Northwestern through the air, but I think that's skewed by the fact that Northwestern just hasn't been very competitive in their games. And overall, teams just haven't had to throw on them. And Purdue might just throw anyway. They might just throw anyway. They don't care. They are liable to throw 40 times. They don't care. They will throw the ball around the yard. And yeah, if O'Connell throws for 40 times in this spot, who's to say that he doesn't put up 30 DraftKings points again? Just because that's what they want to do. And if O'Connell does that, you best believe that David Bell will be having a big game again. He had a huge game last week against Ohio State, 11 catches, over 100 yards, didn't even score a touchdown and still put up a massive score that was in the 2v2 lineup that I ended up on the wrong side of for a single entry takedown. But yeah, so David Bell definitely in play. And then if you're playing O'Connell, you can also look to Jackson Anthrop, who's really come on recently as like a slot guy, gadget player. Been very dynamic for them. Also sees a few carries, making him really interesting. And then, Milton Wright is under 4K for Purdue. He's been pretty good recently. No games worse than 7 DraftKings points in his last 3, 2 17 plus. So he's in play. Those 3 guys are all in play, but I would definitely not leave Bell out of any lineups where you're playing O'Connell. I don't think you need to play Anthrop or Wright, but given the way O'Connell scores his points, which is pretty much all through the air, it makes a lot of sense that if you think O'Connell has a true ceiling game, Anthrop or Wright are probably the secondary beneficiaries and are cheap enough that they would pay off their prices as well. The elephant in the room here is Phil Djerkovich at $4,500 for Boston College. Now, Phil posted 48.5 DraftKings points against Georgia Tech last week, and that is not actually even why I really want to play him in this spot. He should be priced like 6K. The rushing work is there for him. The matchup is good against Florida State. His team has a 28.25 implied team total, putting them in the top half of teams on this slate. Yeah, he will not throw the ball a ton, but he tends to hit on some deep shots, and the rushing floor is pretty high here. So $4,500, good matchup. I will be in on Djerkovich this week. And then, if Armstrong doesn't play, Woolfolk, as I mentioned, the problem here is that it's the late kickoff, and pretty much all of these high-dollar other quarterbacks and Djerkovich are in the early games. So it would be hard to leave, it would be hard to really make significant pivots, I think, in your lineups to get Woolfolk in as a minimum price quarterback if he starts. And honestly, he didn't inspire that much confidence last week anyway. So I don't think you need to go there. At running back, Breece Hall is likely a fade for me just because he is a road dog at Oklahoma who has shown that they have a better rushing defense than passing defense this year. And that could also be due in part to them Oklahoma winning most of their games and teams taking it to the air against them to catch up. But, if Oklahoma keeps this game, if they lead this game, Breece Hall is not going to get he'll get the work, but I don't think he'll have the same sort of upside that we would be looking at if he were winning this game. And, for those sort of game scripts, you can just look at the two performances last year. Not the same kind of performance in the Big 12 championship game where they trailed at halftime. Purdy's pass attempts mean less rushing attempts for Breece Hall. Pretty simple formula there. Kenneth Walker III for Michigan State is interesting against Ohio State. Michigan State's Peyton Thorne is, I think, a decent quarterback, but they've limited him through 31 pass attempts this year, even in games that they've been trailing, like against Purdue. They will run Kenneth Walker III no matter what. They will just run him. And Ohio State probably knows that. So I think that Ohio State tries to sell out against the run in this game, making Walker a riskier play. In my opinion, he has some dud games this year against Nebraska and Indiana where he just couldn't get it going. And I think Ohio State maybe does the same thing here against them, takes a page out of those playbooks and tries to stop them. With Jalen Naylor being banged up, it's basically just Jaden Reed in the receiving game. So I think, Ohio State can try to sell out against the run, make Peyton Thorne and Jaden Reed beat them, which I don't think they're particularly capable of. So sure, Walker could go off like he did against Michigan, and I might have Walker as a bringback to some of my CJ Stroud unconventional bringback, just because I think if Stroud and Ohio State continue to score quickly and effectively against Michigan State's god-awful pass defense, that just means Walker gets more carries, right? Because they just run this offense like that. They don't change their offense dynamically throughout the game to be we're trailing, we need to throw Peyton Thorne 40 pass attempts. They don't do that. They'll just run Walker 30 times. So that makes Walker appealing to me in a Ohio State stack, actually, which is sort of an interesting play that I don't think many people have. Brian Robinson Jr. from Bama, he has the better matchup in this game against Arkansas, surprisingly. I like him a lot here. He has 3 touchdown upside. He has 150-yard upside. He has 30 carry upside. He has anything you would want, plus the game script, plus being at home in this spot. So I really like Robinson here. Braylon Allen from Wisconsin kind of broke the slate last week and also broke my heart by taking all of the work I wanted to go to Julius Davis at minimum price. Big sigh there. But yeah, Braylon Allen injured last week too. He's banged up. 25 carries last week. Went off, but it was against Northwestern. Northwestern gave up 50 points to Kenneth Walker III. They are a terrible rushing defense. One of the worst in the country. Bottom 5 in the country. Nebraska bottled up Kenneth Walker III. And I know these two aren't the same guy and these offenses aren't the same offenses, but it's a red flag. Allen probably still gets 25 carries here, but I don't see him being as super efficient, and I don't see him scoring 3 touchdowns. This Nebraska defense actually not terrible. So yeah, I'm going to be fading Braylon Allen this week, and if it kills me again, then so be it. Trevion Henderson is probably also a fade for me here. The passing game matchup for Ohio State is so good, but honestly, it does make Henderson a probably low-owned play with some leverage, but the risk comes from the blowout. And Ohio State last week gave 14 carries to me and Williams, 13 for Henderson. They were blowing out Purdue, mostly due to the passing game, and they just pulled Henderson. They don't want to risk him. He's a freshman. They don't need to overwork him. They can give me and Williams carries. They can save Henderson for the playoffs if they get there. They don't need to run Henderson into the ground, and they won't. So that really concerns me with Henderson's upside. Sure, he can put up 30 points and be the cause of them getting up. But yeah, I think Ohio State really wants to make a statement this game and try to boost their resume for the playoffs, and they would do that best by having Stroud just air it out and crush the Spartans. Jerome Ford is questionable for Cincy. I don't like him here. I think that he is the tougher matchup against SMU, and he's very touchdown dependent. He actually doesn't see a ton of volume, barely topping 20 carries at all this year. So for me, I'm not going to be on Ford at this price. I just don't see it. Kyron Williams is in the same boat as Travion Henderson, where when Notre Dame starts winning games by a lot, it's Williams either pays off because he got them to that point, or he has like a decent floor game because he's always involved, but he gets pulled for the backups when they're winning by a lot, and that caps his upside. Like, sure, he could, if he played the whole game here, he would probably go for like 30 to 40 DraftKings points. I'm not kidding. But, we saw it last week against Virginia. They had a comfortable lead against a team with a backup quarterback that wasn't moving the ball. They gave Williams like 14 carries. He had like 90 yards and a touchdown. Pretty good. Good for like 16 DraftKings points. And then they pulled him for Logan Diggs and Chris Tyree. That 16 DraftKings points is not going to kill your line, or it's not going to, put other people's lineups with Kyron Williams past you when you have some of these other guys that I think have actual like legit ceilings with 25 like carries almost locked in. That main guy being Hassan Haskins from Michigan. With Blake Corum out last week, he saw 31 carries against Penn State. He saw 5 catches. He put up 28 DraftKings points without even scoring a touchdown. This matchup against Maryland is a cakewalk compared to what he had against Penn State last week. Hassan Haskins is a core play for me here if Blake Corum misses. If Corum plays, Haskins honestly might still be in play for me just because I don't know Corum's health. I don't even know if Michigan really wants to risk Corum in this game. It's interesting to me. I think they just run Haskins again. I think they just ride him again in this spot if Corum misses. Yeah, Haskins saw like more work than Corum anyway throughout the year. It's just Corum was a little more efficient, but that isn't going to matter when Haskins sees the type of volume he saw last week. And if you read my article from this week and last week, you'll see the type of performances that running backs have put up against Maryland, with Kenneth Walker being the latest to shred them. So Haskins is a core play for me this week. And last week, I found out on Friday that Corum would not be playing, even though the news only officially came out Saturday. And it was because Corum tweeted with a geotag in Ann Arbor, while the Michigan football account tweeted that they were getting on the plane to go to Penn State. So with this being an away game in Maryland, I definitely could see us finding out on Friday whether or not Corum makes the trip. If he makes the trip, obviously his status is a little bit more up in the air, and he's probably 50-50 to play. But if he doesn't make the trip, he's obviously out. So then my build process on Saturday morning would be a lot easier because I wouldn't have to worry about this situation. And I would just have all the Haskins I can get. Will Shipley from Clemson, interesting against Wake Forest, bad defense. Shipley and whoever the Clemson lead back has been this year, they've been a lot of COVID, injuries, etc. Whoever the lead back is in games that they have won has seen around 20 carries, 20 plus, 25 carries a game. They are actually favored against Wake, which might be surprising to some people, but if you read my article, you'll find out why this is actually a pretty fair line in my opinion. Shipley, interesting in this spot just because of how bad Wake's defense is and how Clemson's really only reliable way of scoring points this year has been the run game. So I think Shipley is in play here, but I don't like him as much as Haskins, and I don't like him as much as Letty Brown of WVU, who comes in at just 6,200. He's seen 20 or more carries in his last three of his last 4 games. Texas has been shredded on the ground pretty much all year, most recently by Devin Neal of Kansas. And that is not great. And you best believe West Virginia knows that and will run Letty big time in this game. He's dynamic. He has 20 to 25 carry potential. He gets some receptions. He does a lot of their scoring. He's just in a smash spot here, and 6,200 is way too cheap. Pat Garwo from Boston College is really interesting here and presents a great leverage opportunity off of Phil Djerkovich. Djerkovich, as I said, is a minimum price quarterback who will be very popular, and he gets a lot of his points through his rushing ability, particularly in touchdowns. If Garwo is the guy to get those touchdowns, and he got one touchdown against Virginia Tech a few weeks ago, that hurts Djerkovich because Djerkovich isn't getting that touchdown, right? And it's on the ground. Garwo has seen huge work his last 2 games with Djerkovich back and the offense running just a bit more effectively overall. So Garwo is a guy that I think you can play if you're not playing Djerkovich. He's not like a must-play if you're not playing Djerkovich, but definitely in play, and definitely I would not play these 2 guys together because I think you're just capping your upside. Like, Garwo had a pretty solid, real-life game against Georgia Tech, just didn't get in the end zone, and that allowed Djerkovich to put up a huge score. Garwo wouldn't pay off if that happened. So if you think Boston College scores 28 points in this game, as the team total suggests, maybe these guys split the touchdowns, but that just makes Djerkovich a much better price-considered play. But if Garwo gets 3 of the 4 touchdowns, which is possible, he's smashing this $5,800 price tag. So you need to consider that when you're building. And also take into account that Djerkovich will be more popular. For Purdue, I think King Daru and Xander Horvath are somewhat interesting because of, as I said, this Northwestern run defense just got torched by Braylon Allen, Kenneth Walker III. All of these offenses are running over Northwestern. The issue I have here is that Purdue hasn't really shown a tendency to pound it on the ground. They don't care. They'll just pass with O'Connell to Bell. They don't care. But King Daru has seen a bit more carries than Xander Horvath since Horvath returned, even though Horvath was the starter in week 1. So this situation is a little murkier than I'd want. So I don't really trust either of these guys. A guy I do like is Roshan Johnson from Texas. Now, the stud on this team, Bijan Robinson, dislocated his elbow last week, left the game, and is out for the year. Might transfer. Bad news for Texas. Anyway, Roshan Johnson has been a very, very solid option when he has seen starters' workloads in the past. In last year against West Virginia, maybe it was 2 years ago, but yeah, one of these 2 games against West Virginia recently, he ended up with 20 carries, over 100 yards, and yeah, that would pay off at $3,800. So it's a lock and load play for me this week. Don't overthink it. This is just lock and load value. Kevon Lee for Penn State is interesting, and normally Penn State running backs rotation is just complete garbage for me in fantasy. Nobody in this backfield has tended to be viable. I go through all of the apprehensions I have about liking this play in the article, so I'm trying to find reasons not to like Kevon Lee, but the reality is that he just saw 20 carries in a very closely competitive game against Michigan, went for 4.4 yards per carry, posted 88 yards, no touchdowns, but he was by far the lead back in a game that it didn't honestly make that much sense for them to just keep running the ball, and they kept going to him to do that. Now, in this game against Rutgers, last week they were a 1-point underdog. This week they are a 17-point favorite with a 32 implied team total. So it's very possible that Sean Clifford and Jahan Dotson just do the scoring here or something, but I think maybe they're making an effort to get one of these running backs sort of a lead role, and Kevon Lee looks to be that guy based off of last week's performance. So I like Lee at a very cheap price, $3,600, to sort of continue developing in this offense against Rutgers, which is a very bad team. Moving on to wide receiver, we have Jahan Dotson, who I just talked about for Penn State. He's at the top of the board, but I just don't know how much they need him in this spot, but Rutgers can definitely give it up through the air. So Dotson, always in play, but he either has these multiple touchdown games, or he's just kind of there and doesn't really need to do much. So it's certainly possible he goes off again this week, and I'll have some lineups with him as a one-off, and you can get to him with some of these cheap guys, but for me, it's I don't love it. And he doesn't stack with Clifford very well because Clifford just lacks overall upside. It's kind of tough to play, the highest priced wide receiver on the slate as a one-off this week because so many of these other guys are just great pieces in stacks. Wicks for Virginia is worth noting just because I think Armstrong would have to start for him to be viable, and I'm worried that with him being their deep threat, Armstrong's arm being questionable due to his injury, I'm not getting there. As I talked about, Smith and Jigba, great stack with Stroud. Williams, great stack with Young. Hutchinson and Purdy. Mechie goes with Young. Bell goes with O'Connell. Worthy can be played as a one-off or as the top stack option with Keaton Thompson, but I don't love that. He's probably my least favorite of these guys I just mentioned. Jordan Addison, I like more than Worthy, and definitely Kenny Pickett's top stack option. Keaton Thompson from Virginia would be the only guy I have interest in no matter what. He's had a very solid floor, 9 catches in 4 of his last 5 games. Posted like 28 DraftKings points in 4 of those 5 games too. Very solid floor here. And like if he has a touchdown, like great. Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, those guys are smash plays for Ohio State. As I said, like all the receivers there. Jaden Reed from Michigan State. Interesting option as a bring back to the Ohio State stacks, but I don't like this Michigan State passing offense as much as I did Purdue's or Purdue's last week, so I don't know if I'm going to get there on Reed. His price is up there, but he has actually seen a big boost in volume without Jalen Naylor in the offense, so maybe they pepper him with targets again as sort of the only hope for this passing offense in this spot. The 2 Notre Dame guys next to each other in price, Kevin Austin and Michael Mayer, both of these guys are like decent options, but I just don't think they need them really in this game. I don't think they have huge ceilings given the run-heavy nature of the offense. Winston Wright and Bryce Ford Wheaton are West Virginia's lead receivers. They are both interesting. I think both have the potential to post like a 5 for 100 and a touchdown line, but I wouldn't really bank on both of them doing it. I think one or like either of them as a one-off is like acceptable, but even then I think you're playing a game stack situation because Texas has been liable to get into these shootouts. So yeah, Marcus Washington, Texas is number 2, also a good stacking option with Thompson. Thompson has really either posted like massive ceiling games or complete busts. So if you're betting on that massive ceiling game, Washington's their wide receiver 2 if Whittington is out again. And the wide receiver 2 has posted a very nice price considered score in all of Thompson's ceiling games. So I do like Washington here. If you're betting on Thompson, he's a good second option. As I mentioned, Anthrop is an option here. Charlie Kolar is an option with Purdy. Jared Wayne, good option from Pitt, and probably my favorite like one-off value if you're making other stacks on this slate. Jared Wayne from Pitt. Eric All, the tight end from Michigan, is really interesting to me. He has seen good volume recently, is in a great matchup against Maryland, has some touchdown equity, just seems like a really safe play down here at value, but I think I like Jared Wayne from Pitt a little bit more. Beau Collins from Clemson is interesting. He, if Justin Ross and Joseph Nagata miss this game, Beau Collins has seen a lot of work recently. 1 touchdown in each of the last 2 games, 15 and 25 DraftKings points. He's been kind of involved in the offense to an extent all year. I like him the best in this Clemson offense if I'm going there at all, but I'm really not sure. I don't want to bet on this Clemson pass game, even in such a good matchup. Like, it feels pretty gross. But yeah, I think Beau Collins would be the best option there. Lucas Kroll from Pitt is just 3,600. He makes for a good value option. He's their tight end, doesn't have a ton of upside, but he is liable to score a touchdown, get like 50 yards at just 3,600. And then the last guy I'll touch on, minimum price, Dylan Goffney from SMU. Last week, Danny Gray, their lead receiver, went out with an injury, and Goffney came in after only seeing 0 or 1 or 2 targets, in any game this year. He came in for 10 catches, 88 yards. So I don't love this matchup for SMU at all, but yeah, it's tough to ignore that kind of performance at minimum price, given that there was like an injury that gave rise to it. Like, it wasn't completely random. So that's all I've got for you this week. That's all I've got. And if you want to check out my articles, they're in my Substack, as I mentioned before. Please like, subscribe, drop a comment, ask me questions about the slate, talk to me on Twitter. Get engaged so we can have conversations about this stuff. And I look forward to my next video, which I will be recording tomorrow for the Friday night slate. We got a 5-gamer on deck there. Pretty concentrated in where I'm looking on that slate, so I will break it down for you tomorrow. Everyone have a good night. Build some lineups, ask me some questions, and peace.